tell you why.
So we have to be silent, so.
So that's what you meant by retirement. This is an oral history interview with Tom Brady on March 11th, 2009. We're at the Readyville Mill in Readyville, Tennessee, and my name is Jim Williams from the Albert Gore Research Center at MTSU. Also here is Thea Prince and Jane Russ from PARQ, and Matthew Brown from the Gore Center. Well, like it or not, we always ask people, first of all, where and when were you born?
Born in Kilgore, Texas in 1961.
So how did you get to Middle Tennessee from Kilgore, Texas?
Went through grade school and high school and graduated and went to Stephen F. Austin State University in Nacogdoches, Texas. Carthage, Texas is a nearby town. I'm an agriculture major, and I took an internship at Tyson Foods for summer credit. Met Don Tyson, and when I graduated I went to work for Tyson. And Shelbyville, Tennessee was mid-ground between my wife's home in Greenville, South Carolina, and my home in Texas. So Don said, you know, pick a plant. He wanted me to spend a year working in a processing plant before I went into sales. So Tennessee was mid-ground between South Carolina and Texas, so I chose Shelbyville, worked a year in the plant, and then went into sales for Tyson.
And is that who you retired from?
No. I worked for Tyson for 5 years, and in the interim, my wife and I started a candle company, potpourri and candle company. We were at a weekend event in Bell Buckle, and Cracker Barrel, Sally Musser was a buyer for Cracker Barrel and saw us and liked what we did. And we were doing this in an upstairs bedroom of our house. And on Monday, we got an order for $90,000 of Christmas potpourri from Cracker Barrel, and we had no company. We were just doing this in a bedroom, so in a 4-week ship date. So we made it, and Cracker Barrel kind of put our company on the map. And at that time, they were the leaders in gift items for a thriving industry of mom and pop gift shops nationally. So owners of those gift shops would see our product in Cracker Barrel, and my phone number was on it. They would call us, and they wanted it too, and we just kind of exploded. And we ran that company for 15 years, and some fellows, venture capital people in the Northeast, decided they wanted it more than we did, and we gladly sold it. That was 8 years ago. No, not 8 years ago, 5 years ago.
Was that in Bell Buckle?
Mm-hmm.
How many people did you?
165 when we sold. Employed 165.
What was the name of the company?
Nature's Own Potpourri. So we sold it, and I retired early in life and played a couple of years, and found that I needed something to do. So I had horses, and Steve Edwards, who's a local blacksmith, horseshoer, farrier, lives 3 miles down the road here, had shoed for me for a long time. And I had, maybe 10 years ago, started collecting millstones. For what reason, I don't know. I just like them. I think they're works of art. They're hand-hewn stones that were used to grind meal in grist mills like this one. And I had gone to East Tennessee and bought some from a guy named Jim Wills, who's also a millstone collector. And they were in front of my barn before I got them put around the farm. If you visit my farm, there's millstones everywhere. And there was a stack of them, or several, in front of my barn. And Steve Edwards said he and his son canoe on the Stones River, and he said behind Russell's Market there are 2 millstones in the river. So several months passed before I got time to find Readyville, and I found Russell's Market, and I had no idea this mill was here. And it was in need of help. It was very, very, I would think it wouldn't have lasted much longer. Very ill repair, but I like the shape of this mill building. I don't know why, it's just got a beautiful shape to me. So I walked back up to Russell's Market. It was overgrown. There were plastic on the windows that PARQ had been putting there, but the kids had torn that off, and there was big holes in it, and it was just in ill repair. So I walked back up to Russell's Market, and they had answered this question a million times. If they'd answered it once, who owns this mill? And Russell told me that Wayne Epperly owned it, but he'd been dead for 15 years. So, and he had no idea how to, he wouldn't give me any more information than that. Probably suspect of why I wanted to know and who I was. And so I walked back down here and I called 411 information for Wayne Epperly, who had been dead for 15 years, and got a number and called it, and Blythe Ackworth is one of his daughters, one of Wayne Epperly's daughters, and she answered the phone. And first she asked me if I was from Readyville. She's not fond of Readyville. And I told her no, that I lived in Bell Buckle, and she said at that point, well, yes, we would like to sell the mill. She has three sisters, and none of them had any interest in the mill. My children, I have two children, and they don't care anything about the mill. So his situation was the same. They live in Nashville and Kansas City and spread out, and had no interest in Readyville or this mill. So I asked her what the price was, and I almost fell off the porch. I thought, because when I dialed the number, I thought, or when we started talking about it, I thought it would be much more expensive than it actually was. It was not expensive at all to buy. And so I told her that I wanted it. And her husband is an attorney, and I said, and so she suggested that he do the closing. I said, no, I have an attorney in Nashville, John Blankenship. And she paused for a long time. Little Johnny is your attorney, she says. And John Blankenship and she had grew up in the same church, and their father started there's a nursing home affiliated with the Church of Christ in Nashville. And their fathers had started, so she was very familiar with John, so that really made it easy, and I think we closed in a week or so. And that was I think we closed in March of '06. So I started just, first cleaning out all the buildings, and they were filled with 40 years of, what would you say, trash that a lot of people save things thinking they're going to have a use, but the roof was all but gone, and so everything inside had been wet numerous times and ruined. So the first, we cleaned out all the buildings first, and the mill itself was on 12 by 12 oak sills. Are you familiar with sills? That's the foundation of the building if it's put on a pier and beam, in this case rock. And you put the huge piece of log there, and then you build your building on top. Well, the sills had all rotted down, and this end of the mill is actually 22 inches lower than it sits today. So it really was leaning over this direction. So the first thing we did after the cleanup was Bob Warren, who is an engineer in Murfreesboro, structural engineer, through John Blankenship, who's a friend of Bob Warren. Bob donated his engineering expertise to design the plan to raise this building up, remove the rotten sills, and place the whole thing on steel beams. So that was we wanted to get the mill structurally sound and level, as level as we could. So Bob donated his time and expertise to get that project done.
You said that Blythe didn't like Readyville?
I don't want to step on too many toes here. When Wayne died, in 1973, this property was put on the National Register for Historic Places by Nancy Kerrigan. Correct me if I mess this up. Is that correct so far?
Sounds right.
Thea and Jane Edwards know all this history. But as I said, if I get hit by a truck on the way home, my children are not going to care about this mill. My wife, I'm sure, would put a for sale sign in the front yard immediately because they don't have a love of this that I do. And it's a personal thing, I think. That same statement is true with Wayne Epperly. He bought this mill because he wanted one of his son-in-laws to have a job, have a project. So he bought this, and then when that didn't work out, the son-in-law became divorced from one of the daughters, and so Wayne Epperly is holding this mill, and he is, I assume, a fairly wealthy man in Nashville, and bought this for a son-in-law who's no longer a son-in-law. And then he died. Wayne Epperly died. Well, the daughters, they never had a stake in this mill, but there was a lot of negative publicity. They would pick up the Tennessean and read about themselves and their huge neglect for a historic piece of property as if it were their fault. And a lot of that, those stories were coming out of Readyville and Woodbury. People were saying, well, you know, those ladies should take care of that. It's a historic property. Well, they had no interest. So they were really upset with Readyville and Woodbury because they would pick up their hometown Nashville paper and they're just blistered in the press. So there was some ill feeling. So she, I think, was not interested in helping along the way. Very sweet ladies, though, all four of them. And Blythe, you know, as soon as we got through the, you're not somebody who's talked badly about us in the press part, I said, no, I just found this place. I didn't even know it was here. Then it was very easy to acquire.
Did you get the millstones out of the river?
I never have. I've not even seen them. I've been so distracted. I'm sure they're still here. They weigh 2,000 pounds apiece. I just haven't found them. Apparently they're downriver. People tell me that they're downriver a quarter mile or so.
So they've tumbled over the years down.
Well, as this mill's been here since 1812, and when millstones wear out, at the time nobody wanted them. Now they're very desirable landscape art, but at the time nobody wanted them, so they just would tumble them off into the river or just put them in the backyard, and then over time they're so heavy they sink and they're buried, and you won't find them until you happen to be doing some dozer work or something. So.
You said you were prepared to pay more than you did. What would you have thought you should?
Oh, I don't want to get into all the numbers. I'm sure if you want to dig, you could find them. But it's 6 acres. It's 5.97 acres on the Stones River, frontage on both sides of the road, and I just assumed that it would have been more expensive than it was. Of course, we're in Readyville, so.
Okay. And what was your wife's reaction when you?
My wife's reaction, and everyone I know thought I had lost my mind. Because it was, you can't appreciate, these two ladies can appreciate, but you have to have seen what it was when I started. We couldn't sit in this building. There were no windows. This building, for instance, is all lined in poplar, but when I bought it, the outside wall was the inside wall. It was just a stud, and the outside wall was the same as the inside wall. No insulation. You could look up and see the tin roof, which was rotted away. 2 weeks after I bought it, we had a hailstorm, and there were hundreds and hundreds of holes, because the roof that was on this when I bought it was probably from the late 1800s, and it was just paper thin. It had rusted so badly, and sheets were gone, and it was not nailed down, and so it was a big project. It looked to be an awesome project.
So why did you think you could do it? It didn't sound like you had a lot of experience before with.
You know, it's funny what we learn in high school. I'm from Texas, and every boy, I think, in Texas grows up and goes through high school in the agriculture FFA program. So at least 2 hours, and by the time you're a senior, sometimes 4 hours a day of your class time is spent in the shop, learning to repair farm equipment and learning to weld and basic carpentry and things that you would do around the farm. And I did that, not knowing I would ever use that. And really, it was a lot of fun. It was, I mean, welding class, we would see how many welding rods we could stick in the insulation in the attic, and we'd weld a little bit too. So all the skills that it took to do this, and I am not a skilled carpenter, and if you look close, you can easily see that. But I've always had an idea that I can learn fairly quickly how to do whatever, and this was the same. It's boards and nails, and it's not. In a little bit, 99% of this I've done myself. I did when it took 6 months to paint it, and I did hire a couple of guys to help me paint that had previously worked for me and other things. And Bob Warren, two of his guys, helped us to jack it up and put it on steel beams because we needed their expertise in doing that. But the majority of it was not hard, time consuming, but not so intimidating that I didn't think I could handle it. And I bought it as for something to do. So I bought it for a long term. I'm still not in a hurry. I just do literally a few boards a day, or plant some trees, or, just to do a little bit I try to get out here every day and do something. And 3 years later, we're where we are.
What was the reaction in the town here when you bought it?
Oh, I think everybody was, Mary Reedy says I'm the rock star of Readyville, because apparently for years, everybody in Readyville has beautiful and fond memories of this place. It's been here all of their lifetimes and all of their parents' lifetimes, and many of them learned to swim here, and they all did business here. If before there were Kroger's and Publix, if you wanted flour, which every family had to have, you must come to the mill. This was put here to serve the earliest settlers in Tennessee, and there weren't even stores then. So you grew your wheat or corn and you brought it to the mill, and wait your turn. You're familiar with the phrase "wait your turn"? That comes from the turning of the millstone. So you waited until it was your turn on the millstones, and so this was a community gathering spot. And I'm off track. I forgot what your question was now.
The reaction of the community.
Oh, fantastic, fantastic. I have had thousands of people stop. Continually have people stop. I rarely get in a full day's work because I'm showing people what's going on or touring around. Incredibly favorable reaction. One group of photographers came from Nashville and blistered me badly because they liked it when it was more photogenic, they thought, when it was about to fall in the river. So, but locally, am I right? I mean, locally, people are very pleased. It's a small community, but literally thousands of people stop, and I have had elderly people cry, and I've had local people cry because they never thought in their lifetime they would see that it was, serving any kind of purpose anymore. Thea's tearing up right now. Great response. This artist named Maxwell, his daughter brought him. He was well in his 90s. He may still be alive. Well in his 90s and on oxygen, and she drove him out here, and he gave me those prints of whenever he painted these pictures. And I guess he's the oldest person I had that had an emotional reaction about seeing that the mill was open again, or that things were going on here, because it sat vacant for, I don't know, almost 40 years, and literally inhabited by rats and coons. Thousands of rats, literally. They just ran. It was their mill. That's where they lived. So.
I've watched your YouTube video,
Mm-hmm.
and it seems like you know quite a bit about the history of the mill. How did you learn that?
Since I bought it, I have read everything online I think ever written. I still occasionally find something new about the mill. And PARQ has an extensive history posted on their website for the mill. But just reading, Google search Readyville Mill and Reedy's Mill and Charles Reedy and anything having to do with this community, the mills I always mentioned. Local people stop by, and Dowman Bragg that I have talked about is how old is Dowman? He might be 80, but he worked here as a kid when he was little, and various jobs, and he's told me a lot about the mill. And other old timers who, a bus driver from Franklin brought a bunch of elderly ladies out yesterday, and he lived here in the 70s, Gil Ezel, and worked here. And so people have, informed me, and a lot of research on the internet.
So when did it stop being a mill? Do you know?
Well, in the 70s, there was a group of hippies that lived here, which are all still alive. They visit from time to time, but this was quite the little hippie commune. I guess in the late 70s, that we had. Now in 2009, we're kind of going back to a green lifestyle, and the media is all green is positive, and natural foods are positive. But also in the late 70s, there was this whole hippie movement about getting back to nature, and so they sold honey here, and they had a school bus. They would drive to Kansas, and they had a hole cut in the top of the school bus and all the seats taken out, and they would drive under an elevator in Kansas, and they would fill up that school bus with wheat all the way to the top through the hole in the roof, and then they would drive back here and grind that here in the, when was the last grinding? Maybe in 76, 77, because the dam was failing, and when it was gone, there was no more power for the mill. So I would think late 70s, and they stayed here until like 80, 81, but the mill wasn't functional. They were still selling flour and cornmeal, but they were having it ground at Falls Mill and bringing it over here.
So you bought the place, and then you have to go about, I suppose you had some sort of plan in mind. Where do you start?
It's embarrassing, but actually, I to this day don't have a plan. You just tackle, this needs to be done, so I try to stay focused on whatever that job is until that task is completed, and then you just move to the next one.
Well, did you start with what you thought was the most critical?
Most critical was the mill, and that's the first thing we did, was to have Bob Warren to come out and take a gazillion pictures and design a plan of how to lift this mill. I don't know if you're familiar, but there's a Brown's mill, used to be a Brown's mill, and nobody was taking care of it, and they had a big community gathering, and they were going to save Brown's mill, and they had hired some local house movers to jack that thing up, and because they thought that was the right thing to do. So they were in the process of jacking it up, and they had this big community meeting, and Bob Warren actually was there. They had hired him as well to design a plan, and he was not aware of the house movers that were already jacking it up. And at that meeting, the first meeting Bob Warren attended, they got a phone call that it's gone. It had fallen in the river. Because in the process of raising any building, especially one this age, if you go too fast and crack something major, I mean, it's 79 feet tall, the weight of it, and Brown's Mill, just the weight of it, when they jacked it up, it moved during the night, and it had like log cabin corners, and it pulled the bottom one apart, and it was just like a puzzle, and into the river. So that was the most pressing, was to get this mill stable, because although the grounds are beautiful, and these buildings are nice, the mill is the treasure. So
why did you decide to use steel instead of replace with timber?
Well, in the probably in the 70s, there was a grant given to, I'm guessing it was the Kerrigans. No, it was Epperly. A grant was given for him to do some work, and he put he put one steel beam across half of the front and a steel beam down the side. So the two steel beams were already here, and it would have been not cost efficient to. I want everything to match and look the same. So we went back with the steel because steel had partially been done, and steel is forever. And this mill floods. Make sure I show you the marks on the door where through the years they've notched the door when the water gets up into the first floor of the mill, which is regular. Over history, it's very regular. So that we don't have to replace seals again. And the quality of the lumber that we cut today is not as good as the quality of lumber that was here in 1878. So if we put it on oak seals again, the quality of the lumber is not as good, and down the road we'd have to do it again. So we went with steel for a number of reasons. Cost probably was the most important.
Did you have a budget in mind at the beginning?
No. Yes, I did. I had a couple of CDs in the bank that were not. They were just in the bank drawing a little bit of interest, and I told my wife, I said, I'm gonna take these 2 CDs and that's all I'm gonna spend, and I am beyond budget. I have exceeded the budget. So, but I bet if you ask a bunch of people, you'd find that people perceive that I've spent a lot more than I have, and I have not spent a tremendous amount of money. Nowhere near what it is. No, not even a fraction of what the plan was if you hired everything done. The windows, it had, none of these buildings had windows. There wasn't a piece of glass anywhere in any of these buildings. There was a couple of rotted out window frames. So I got some bids for people who build windows, and my cheapest bid was $54,000 to build the windows. And there's 130 something sashes in these buildings. So $54,000 is a lot of money. So I went to Franklin, and there's a guy who has a woodworking shop in a strip mall over there, and I said, he sells equipment. I said, I'll buy the equipment from you if you will teach me how to build these windows. And he gladly did, and so I built all the windows at my shop in Bell Buckle. So instead of spending $54,000, I spent $3,100, and I own all the equipment to build windows. So that's kind of the story of all the process. I mean, it's this poplar. I bought 13,000 board feet of poplar, and I lined these 2 buildings and had enough left over to do the cabin. And the Amish in Etheridge, Mo Zook, it's his business to do tongue and groove poplar. So he cuts the tree, and 6 months later you get a postcard that your order is ready, and you drive over, and all day long you load lumber. And but I could not have sheetrocked these buildings for what this 3/4 inch tongue and groove poplar cost. It was not even 60 cents a board foot, and you can't sheetrock for what this costs. So if you hunt around, you can find real good deals. You just have to spend the time and look, and I've never been in a hurry, so it's okay if I don't get something done today. I'll wait. That's like my kitchen. I've been waiting for 6 or 8 months. Thea's pointing at the lights. There was no electricity in any of these buildings.
Ever before?
Probably there had been a light bulb from time to, like in the mill, there's still some insulators where back in the day they ran 2 wires instead of 1 piece of Romex. They had 2 wires, and there's some, so I'm sure it had a light bulb in there, but there was no wiring, there was no light at all. And all these lights, I don't know how many there are, probably close to 100. These are service station lights from the 20s, island lights they call them, like if you pulled in to get gas, these would be your lighting. and for 8 months I bought, green ones are a dime a dozen because most of them were green, but some of them were white like these. So 8 months of eBaying, I put together enough of these. They're steel and they're porcelain coated, and I just think they look cool and they're kind of period correct for early electricity. So that was the, and interestingly, in the mill, on eBay was listed these white porcelain lights, and somebody had 24 of them. They're bigger than these. I think these are 18 inches and these are 24 inches over. They had 24 of them in their individual packaging that had been put away in the, hardware store closed down at some point, and had 5 boxes of these that were never opened, and they shipped them to me in the original packaging from the 20s. So that was kind of cool.
Since the mill was already on the National Register, did you try to use the tax incentives and various things that are available for historic property?
There are no tax incentives for private ownership. I have every receipt I've ever spent. I mean, if it costs 29 cents for a screw, I have a receipt for that, but my CPA tells me that there's very little available for private ownership. If PARQ owned it, it would be, it would be funded by the government 100%, I think. And there is some little tax, and if you know one, please let me know. But for some reason, it doesn't qualify. There's something for restoration, but I don't qualify because of other reasons or whatever, and I can't remember what those are.
I'm not an expert, but I wondered if you had...
I have, I'm not, and this is a problem for me because there is grant money available for projects like these, but I am a hammer and nails kind of guy, and I don't have the desire to chase public funding because I couldn't do what I do if I did that, because it is a huge, lengthy project. There are other interested parties who, for instance, now concerning the river, we're on the list for some infrastructure money, and that's about all I know because I'm not a guy named Neil Applebaum, who is over the watershed for Cannon County, is kind of doing some work along those lines, and almost as much as I do, but apparently we're on the list for infrastructure money having to do with repairing the river and fixing the dam.
So when it came time to replace the siding and the walls and the windows, did you try to replace with like materials?
I did. I kept if you look kind of through the paint on the outside, you can see that I kept every board keepable. I mean, I would saw the rod out and then I would piece in. A company called Winnell Lee in Cookeville mills bevel siding, which is what this has on it. So I brought a sample and had it milled identical to what was rotted away. And probably 40% of the exterior siding on these buildings was not savable. If it was savable, it's still here. But I pieced in like material, so it's like it was. And at some point in history, I don't know about this building, but the ice house certainly had been lined in something similar to poplar. Maybe it was cedar. Some of it is still there, but the majority of it is long gone.
Did you find yourself wanting to or needing to do any research about mill construction, or did you just...
Oh yeah, I read everything online, and still do. Like right now I'm reading how to install HVAC, because depending on what somebody's going to charge me to hook, I'm going to do that myself. I know I'm going to do all the piping, but I would hire someone to actually do the freon and hooking the units up if that was affordable. But if it's not, I'll get on the internet and I'll do it myself, which is pretty much how I've done everything else. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. So it sounds like you were concerned to be historically.
Oh, I want it as historically correct as it can be, but still be functional in the 21st century. I mean,
But not to the point of drawing blueprints and having
No.
experts swoop in and give you.
no, they cost money. They cost money. I can't spend. Like I said, I had a handful of money, and that's what I had. And although I have gone over that, I haven't gone over that by much, and it's because I do everything myself. Because and I want everybody to make a good living. I just don't have the money to pay them. I can't tell you how many rock masons stopped when I was laying rock, and because I bought some old fireplaces and tore them down, some old rock chimneys and tore them down to do a lot of rock work around this property. And I'm not a rock layer, and I even had rock masons point out to me that I wasn't a rock layer. But I still didn't hire them, although I would love to have hired them. I didn't have the money to hire them. So I learned to lay rock.
Now, you said before you bought the mill, PARQ was already here with the plastic over the windows or something.
Mm-hmm.
So once you bought the mill, what is your relationship been with PARQ?
Thea checks on me every day to make sure I'm doing things right.
They make it clear you're the owner, but
There is no
the main
relationship
reason for their existence
other than a friendship and a
Am I allowed to speak and then you can
Sure.
cut it if you want?
yeah desire to have the mill looking good
We
again.
can be now we still want to be involved because we can now be the educational arm. There are so many possibilities and visions for school kids to come here. There's a gal that's writing a book about children's view of some things that have happened here. And even as a 501c3, there's possibilities of us working together on things. And that way we can stay involved and we don't have to own this to enjoy that it's alive.
It's kind of don't get hung up in the owners. This kind of belongs to Cannon County. I mean, it legally it's mine, but it's here for Cannon County. This is just a toy for me, and I'm enjoying. Nothing is feels better than to have these old people that are from this area come and just think that this never happened. So a lot of satisfaction, and we've had community events. I've never turned anybody down, even when we shouldn't have had community events, when there were nails everywhere. And hopefully, long after I'm gone, this will be here, and somebody will be tending to it a little bit. And
So looking back over the 3 years,
been 3 years this month.
what was the biggest challenge of restoring?
The biggest, what I dislike the most is the painting.
When you rented
The most challenging.
caretaker,
That was challenging. Yeah, that was challenging. I've yet to do what's most challenging. Most challenging is working with the state to get the dam repaired to get the mill operational again, and I am sadly losing hope of that happening. So it will be a challenge to convert a power source to operate this mill with a diesel engine or some other method. That's going to be it'll be a challenge to the mill is not currently lined up, like the shafts are not lined up because the building has moved so much as the foundation was rotted away. And when we righted it as best we could, but you can't pick that thing up and slide it over. So I've got that'll be a challenge when I start lining up shafts and things. Painting is the most displeasurable thing I've done. Crown mold in the cabin would be the most challenging.
So the mill dam isn't on the property,
It is on the property.
but
I have
state-
3 point something acres over here and 2 acres on the other
So why
side.
is the state involved?
The dam is there in its entirety. It needs a little stonework, but it's still there from 1842. But the river bank, the river itself, has washed. The dam used to go from this side of the river to the other side where there was a hayfield. And the dam just went from this side over to the bank of the hayfield. Well, over time and no maintenance, the river has washed the dirt at the far end of the dam and where the hayfield is. And so now there's a 59-foot gap where the river has taken out 59 feet of the hayfield. So the river actually is going around the dam. So we need to backfill where the river has washed away the hayfield. We just need to move that hayfield back this direction, and then water will go over the dam, and then we could divert a portion of it through here to run the mill. And because it's the Stones River, and we have the Clean Water Acts and all of the environmental issues, and there is not a larger environmentalist than myself, but that needs to be fixed. That dam needs to be fixed because this is a historic treasure for Cannon and Rutherford counties and the state of Tennessee. There's just a handful of these mills left. There were 27 mills between here and the plateau, and now there's one. This is the last one on the Stones River anywhere that's still standing. And there were, I suppose, hundreds of them scattered through the county. And now there's none, one. So that needs to be fixed. So there are environmentalists involved. There is TDEC involved. There is the Department of Agriculture involved. There are Army Corps of Engineers, and there's so many of these large organizations that have to give me permission to repair the dam. And because I have to go through all the organizations and there has to be so many studies, impact studies done on what will happen when the dam is repaired, that it's cost prohibitive for an individual to do it. So I do hope one day that somebody realizes that other than myself and PARQ, and there are many, many, many people who want to see that done, but we don't know how to do it. I don't know how to do it. I mean, I know how to fix the dam, but I don't know how to climb through the mass of, it would be 8-hour, you guys know this, I'm sure, but it would be a full-time, 40-hour-a-week job for maybe years just to put the puzzle together, to get all the questions answered, to repair what's been there since 1842. A funny story is a girl, early on when I first bought this, I have been contacting all the state organizations and inviting them out because it's my theory that if people come out here and see the project, that they'll fall in love with it as I did and want to fix the problem. So long before I fill out any paperwork or applications or any of that, I want the people whose desks that will cross to have been here to see actually what the project is. So a young girl out of college, very sweet, works for the Department of Biology, let's say, and she's a biologist. And she was concerned, very sweet girl. We walked out there and she says, well, we are concerned about some life form. I think it was a mussel. Our records indicate that statewide the numbers are declining on this mussel. And I said, well, how many were there in 1842? And I'm just doing this to be funny, and it was all in jest. But of course they didn't take records of that in 1842. And she just looked so puzzled, and she said, well, I said, well, when did you start generating your data? And she told me roughly, and I said, well, whatever populations were here then dealt with this structure in the river. I mean, if there were any there then, they were certainly getting from one side to the other. So she laughed, and by the time she left, was in love with the mill. But she was so far down the totem pole of people that could actually help me, I thought, was she'd seen it, and she was one of the hundreds that have seen it, and is now a believer and is in love with the mill. But I've not had the governor here yet, but I've had everybody right up to the governor, and I think everybody wants it repaired. Everybody wants it. I get emails from the commissioners for these departments statewide for Tennessee. What's the progress? What's the progress? They're asking me this, and it's just that I don't know. I think it's such a big. There's so many people involved that personally I don't have the energy nor the desire to coordinate them all into signing the paper that says fix the dam. And now with this engineering plan that it's not financially not possible for an individual to do that.
So they won't let you fix it yourself?
No.
It would have to meet their specifications?
Yes.
And that's the $2 million you were talking about earlier?
The engineering company is where I get the $1.5 million to $2 million. That's their number. That's not the state's number. That's the engineering firm's number to repair it to the specifications of the state. And I'm sure that's probably a good number for all the people that must be paid to get such a thing going. But if I had a track hoe in 2 weekends, I could fix it for 10 grand or less. It's just moving stone and laying stone and the depositing of some huge rocks. Now, I'm sure that's simplistic and layman, but in my mind, I mean, that's how you would do it.
Has it helped you as an individual to have nonprofits like PARQ supporting what you're doing?
In what way? I love the support. I love everybody's
well, like
support.
When you're dealing with the government bodies, do they look
absolutely.
at you differently than if you were just a private guy?
I don't know how to answer that, but the reason that the higher ups have visited here is because Theo Prince and PARQ have the time in their lives to call and hound those people and get them to come and invite them and have the big lunches and very successful. Like I say, everybody who has been out to see this project loves this project and sees what a value it is for the state and the counties. And they're all on board with the project. But it kind of stops there because I don't know where to go next.
You have a 10-year vision, a 50-year vision for the mill?
No, my visions are more like 10 days or 10 minutes. I hope, I want the mill to be operational again, and I want the dam repaired so that we can show people how early settlers did it. It's such an engineering marvel. I mean, it's so simple, but it's so intelligent. And it's beautiful out here. It's like I said, it's a treasure, and I want people to enjoy that. Short term, it needs to generate some revenue. I still see it as an investment. I'm not upside down. I haven't spent enough that I'm upside down. But when you have an investment, it needs to generate some income. So, if I put a restaurant in, then that will draw people and make more people familiar with what's here. And by doing these weddings and doing these class reunions, and the more people that are aware of it, hopefully the more support we'll have to get these bigger projects implemented.
Does that mean you're going to have to hire people?
For a restaurant?
For a restaurant or
oh, absolutely, absolutely. This place could again be a large employer. We've got a beautiful spot on the river down there for canoeing. A great place to put canoes in for canoeing and kayaking, which employs guides and people who rent boats. And if we put a restaurant in here, we'll need a full staff for that. We need We need speakers, what are docents, because people, when they're here, they want the whole story. They want the tour. Need to hire people for that, and just need to hire people to be here when people stop. I can see that we would generate, certainly we would be Readyville's largest employer, and it wouldn't surprise me that at some point we could be one of Woodbury's larger employers. This is 10,000 square feet of buildings, so there needs to be people everywhere. We're 8 miles from Interstate 24. We need the blue sign, and we'll get tourists. People love old mills and covered bridges, and will drive out of their way to see an old grist mill or a covered bridge. So we need to build a covered bridge here too, and then we'll get 100% of the tourist trade.
Is it feasible to generate power?
Yes, absolutely. We can be 100% green. This mill in Arthur McFerrin and W.B. Hayes bought this mill, partnered in 1889. Before 1900, they had built this ice house, and Arthur McFerrin, his nickname was Rat, was the genius, and he was one of the few people, or the first people, to decide, I can, from the power of the river turning the turbine, I can generate electricity and make ice. Because ice is a reaction of ammonia and electricity. So in his vision to make ice, he put that together. He produced electricity from the turbine that's still under the mill today. And then, as a kind heart, he wired every house in the community of Readyville with electric lights before Murfreesboro had power. This was one of the rural communities, the first in the state who had electric lights, and it was generated from power produced by the East Fork of the Stones River in this mill. 100% green, and in 1937, TVA bought the rights for the power that was being produced by the mill, so they were still producing electricity in 1937. So it has all the bells and whistles for what's politically correct today. It can be green, and we get that turbine turning. That's a 350 horse turbine. It'll generate enough power, and has in history, to run all the houses in Readyville. So we certainly, of course, we have a few more appliances in these homes than we did back then, but we certainly can produce the energy for all the needs of this mill and sell back the power to the electric co-op. And they have to buy it. So, not that I would care if they bought it or not, but...
and you get some farmers growing organic wheat, and then you...
already have a local group of farmers. Do you know their name?
There are several groups, but
There's a group of local farmers who are organic, who now sell their produce in Woodbury and other places.
Angie Ott is one of the people.
Who is it?
Angie Ott.
Okay.
The granddaughter of...
And they want to sell their goods out here. So.
Do they have grains to grind?
Oh, they would love to have grains to grind. Yeah, but there's no place to grind their grains.
Naturally.
The way it should be. I can hook an electric motor and grind some grain, and will in the short term while I'm waiting for the across the street. We've got to take a break.
Okay. That's... If I missed anything for this part of the...